So every state has a nation and every nation has a state. That's going to be a really key element that sort of sets up the system that we live in. So then what the heck is a nation? A nation is this common identity that we have around this thing we're going to call our nation. This is going to be super difficult to explain. It's one of those things that it is the way that it is because that's the way that it is, but that's just an awful explanation. It's really a collective sense of belonging to a group that is a nation. So I believe I'm a part of this nation called America. Doesn't matter why, doesn't matter even what it is. It just means that I believe that other people believe that they're a part of this thing as well. And this sort of collective belief together means that we've invented this thing called a nation, and at the same time, we believe that it's real, which makes it real. I know that sounds super weird. Nations are these imagined communities. It didn't have to be this way. We could have imagined ourselves as, say, Western North Americans. And we could have all just sort of saw ourselves that way. There's no border between here and this place called Mexico, but there's maybe a border between the East and the West. That's the way we could have done it. That's not how we did it for a variety of historical reasons. But we imagine ourselves to be a part of this, and by all of us imagining ourselves to be a part of this, it makes it real. It requires this ongoing collective self-recognition. We keep reminding ourselves that we are us. I know that this sounds super weird, but this is kind of the way that it goes. I mean, if you ask why someone is American, they might say, well, I was born here, but that's usually not enough. It's not just sort of, I was born here and that's what makes America great. We usually see that it's wrapped up with our identity, and our identity is wrapped up with this sort of idea of the nation. All right, so the modern assumption, again, this is not a very good explanation of it, but honestly, it's, without going too in depth into psychology and sociology, is probably the best we're going to get right now. So the modern assumption is that a nation should govern itself. In the same way that you should be in charge of your own life, this thing called the nation, if we think about it as a thing, as a single identity, it should be in charge of its own life. And what does that mean? That means having the freedom to make its own decisions, which essentially means it needs a state. That's its ability to sort of act on its own. A nation should have its own state. The formal terminology is national self-determination. They get to determine for themselves if they want to be part of it, if they want to have their own state, or if they want to be part of something else. So then that raises questions, right? So let's say I have a nation without a state. Is a nation without a state actually a nation? So the Kurds, for example, they've been wanting to have this place called Kurdistan. All the other states have been saying, nah, no Kurdistan. You don't get that. So are the Kurds a nation, even though they don't have a state? Are the Palestinians a nation, even though they don't have a state? On the flip side, we might say, does a state without a nation need to construct a nation? So, for example, Afghanistan. There is no such thing as an Afghan person. There is Pashtuns and Uzbeks and Turkmen, a bunch of other groups. So if we're going to have this country called Afghanistan, does Afghanistan have to change the identity of the people in there so they start to see themselves less as Pashtun and more as Afghani? We might talk about, for example, the United States. Like, how did the United States, this thing that was sort of, I mean, all countries were created, but more recently sort of created, how did it take people from Germany and people from Britain and people from China and people from Africa and people from all over the place and put them together and say, okay, now you guys are all, you're not Chinese, you're not English, you are American. Like, how do you construct that? But that becomes a key element of this whole thing, is that if you want a state, you need a nation. If you have a nation, you need a state, et cetera, et cetera. But this really leads us to that same principle that's not a great principle, but it's really the one that is the practical thing. A nation is a nation if other nations treat it as a nation. A roommate is a roommate if other roommates treat it like a roommate. This is that corollary to that state rule we just said. A state is a state if other states treat it like a state. I know this isn't great. I'm not trying to make it great. I'm just trying to say that this is sort of, these are the roommates that we're talking about. This is the system that we have, a system made up of roommates, a system made up of nation states. So understanding what makes a nation state is kind of important, but just, again, without going, we're not going to get too in the weeds on that. That's really going to be the extent of it. When I come back, I just want to talk about the future of this. Like, this is the system we have right now. Is this the system we're going to have going into the future? Does this system work for us? If it doesn't work, maybe we need to try something else. So that's it.